What's up everyone? My name is Brandon Scott and I'm a wedding photographer in Monterey, California. And I wanted to talk to you about one of my favorite lenses, the Leica Summicron 35 version 4 King of Bokeh? Question mark. Let's get into it. So I wanted to start by talking about why I ended up getting this lens. I'm a wedding photographer, as I mentioned, and more over the years, couples have been asking for film or that film aesthetic. And while my primary camera is the SL2S, the main lens that I've been using for probably 80% of the photos that I take is the Leica 35 APO SL. And this lens I've had since 2021, the beginning of 2021, and it's been an incredible performer. Absolutely in love with this lens and can't picture never using it. Its main critique, I guess, is that it is sometimes too sharp and lacks character. And I think it's kind of interesting. I would also describe it as clinically sharp. And the word clinical is a little bit of an overused phrase when it's describing modern Leica lenses. Usually it's being thrown at the lens as in a negative way with a negative connotation. I actually appreciate that it's clinically sharp, even though I'm often looking for more character in my photos. It definitely has that Leica 3D pop. The bokeh is incredible and it does have character, but it is so sharp that sometimes I have to actually dumb down the sharpness in my edit. Actually, my main preset backs off sharpness and presence a little bit, just to make it look a little less tack sharp. That brings me to why I ended up looking for the 35 Summicron. I actually was looking for a lens to kind of augment my wedding workflow and kind of give that film-like nostalgic aesthetic without actually shooting film. I do shoot film, but I wanted to incorporate it more than shooting film is practical, if that kind of makes sense. Not every wedding do I shoot film. I kind of sprinkle it in as I see fit, and the way that I've evolved incorporating film into weddings has kind of gone from using an M6 and the rangefinder system to sort of now figuring out that the best way for me to incorporate film at weddings is by using a point and shoot. So I'll have a video about maybe how I shoot film at weddings later on. The one-handedness is really nice, and not having the added bulk of an extra rangefinder body when I'm already carrying a lot of other gear is kind of nice. I was looking for a lens that I could slap onto the front of an SL2S, which I already have on me at a wedding, and kind of evoke that same type of feeling and that same type of aesthetic without actually using film. I originally was looking at the 35 Summilux Steel Rim Reissue and bought it last spring. I used it for a handful of weddings, and at the end of the day, I ended up returning it. And I really did love the lens in concept, in theory. I loved how compact it was. I loved the look of it. I thought it was really just such an awesome vintage vibe. I think the couples really enjoyed being photographed by it just because it was so unintrusive and diminutive. It has a look, and it did check the character box that I was kind of looking for. Photos from it do look like film photos, and I think, or at least what couples have in mind when they're asking for film photos. However, its fatal flaw for me was that it only has that look at 1.4. And there are a lot of instances where I don't want to be stuck to 1.4 and I'd like to shoot 1.8 or 2 or something like that. When you stop that lens down to even just 1.8, immediately it cuts off that flare that looks so cool. And especially at 2.0, it's just completely gone. And that lens is as sharp as any other 35. It still has a little bit of the character attributes, but I mean, its character, it all comes from the 1.4. The other problem though that I had with that, and the reason why I wanted to shoot stop down, is because nothing is in focus at 1.4, or not in focus. Nothing is sharp at 1.4. So I found myself wanting to stop down to get the center at least somewhat sharp, but still wanted to maintain the character, but then it doesn't keep the character. That lens wasn't for me, and at the end of the day, I returned it. So I still wanted a character lens, but I needed something that was somewhat sharp at its maximum aperture, still had character, And the reason being too is because I use the 35 so much for wedding work that I needed some kind of backup, not just to be solely reliant on the 35 APO SL for my 35 needs. So if it could fill the role of being a character lens, but also like a practical equipment backup, then that's kind of what I was looking for. All of the research that I had done kind of steered me towards the version 4 35 Summicron, which is what, spoiler, I ended up getting. There are two versions out there, the made in Canada version, the made in Germany version. From my understanding, there's really not enough of a difference to favor one over the other if budget's a thing. If budget is not a thing, because the made in Germany ones do fetch a little bit higher price than the made in Canada ones, then I think it's worth getting the made in Germany one. There's nothing definitive online, but I guess it's rumored that the Canadian versions have a little bit poor material choice and the build quality can lead to problems if they're abused. Being that I'm a wedding photographer and I'm using this thing in some pretty terrible environments, I wanted to just make sure that build quality wasn't a factor I had to consider and worry about. So I ended up just getting a made in Germany one that was pretty much pristine. And at the end of the day, I didn't pay that much more than a made in Canada version, but I feel much more comfortable about using it in extreme situations. Here I am, I have this. I've had it for about 9 months and have used it pretty much every week at least as a everyday carry. My everyday carry, I have one of these SL2Ss, this one, that's kind of the EDC camera. When I leave the house, I grab this or I grab the Q2. So between the two of them, this gets a ton of personal use. As far as wedding work goes, I'll bring it along if I feel like the couple or the venue or the space that I'm doing the photo shoot or the wedding in kind of lends itself to being sort of like a character lens kind of situation. It came in really handy when I was photographing elopement in Joshua Tree, and whenever I am doing a elopement or a engagement shoot like in the woods or something like that, or where a lot of nature is involved, and that lens flare can really fit in nicely. And I actually ended up having to send the 35 APO into the shop. I had to send it off to Leica because there was a little bit of a loose ball bearing inside after all those years of rough work, I guess, and needed a CLA too. So I ended up sending this away, and while this was gone, I had a couple weddings where I still needed the 35, and so I ended up using this 35 version 4 as my main lens, and it works so well. And it was actually, thankfully, they were both weddings where I thought that the vintage nostalgic vibe added a lot to the wedding itself, so it fit really nicely. It was just so wonderful having such a compact lens. I mean, you can kind of see the difference. Obviously, this 35 Summicron, the version 4, is so much smaller. It's just a tiny little jewel of a lens, and put on my old M10P, it was just the most compact form factor. It was awesome. The lens itself has a hood that just clips on to the front like this. I honestly never use it because I'm actually looking for the flares, like one of the main reasons why I got the lens. For protection, I'm using this B&W just clear filter, which has been fantastic. If you do have the hood, then you also have the square lens hood cap, which is pretty sweet looking. Both of these just live in my office drawer and never really see the light of day. I end up just getting like a 3-pack of these like really, really cheap lens caps from B&H and just using these because it's funny, I've never lost one of these cheap lens caps, but I just feel like if I use the really expensive $50 Leica lens cap, I will lose it. So I don't know. Anyways, I just used these cheap lens caps for this one just because it's an everyday carry camera, and because I'm not using it with a lens hood like I am the Q2 or something. I do want a little bit of extra protection, but I don't want to worry about dropping this or getting it knocked off somewhere. Overall, build quality is everything you'd expect from Leica. It's super clicky, and the resistance on the focus ring is fantastic. It's 6-bit coded, which I wanted to talk to you guys about. This lens, when I got it, was not 6-bit coded. I'm not sure if any of them came from the factory 6-bit coded. You guys can tell me in the comments section if I'm wrong about that. There's 2 other methods for 6-bit coding just shy of sending it to Leica. One is buying a pre-6-bit coated flange off of eBay. I went that route first because it was the least expensive and quickest. I mounted it on and honestly it sucked. The 6-bit coating was correct, but the flange itself was so poorly made that it just did not fit into the lens mount, the M to L adapter that I'm using, and it didn't fit onto the M10P that I was using either. Part of the reason, when I looked at it more closely, was the machining. The flange mounts on here have a slight chamfer to them, and I think that sort of just aids in mounting the lens. I just didn't want to risk it, and it was so bad. So I sent that back, and the next option is buying a 3D printed stencil with paint pens that comes in a kit, and you mount the stencil onto your flange, and then you basically just fill in the stencil with the black and white paint pens that are provided. When you do that, it's not, I don't know if you've seen a 6-bit flange before, but the flange here where the 6-bit coating is actually like recessed in, and the paint kind of like sits in a little bit of a well there. When you're doing the stencil and the markers, it just draws it on top of the flange. So when I did that, the very first time I mounted it, all of the white just scraped right off. Obviously that's not what you want, and now I have the risk of white paint flecks getting into the camera. Not great. So I ended up just finally biting the bullet and sending it off to Leica. It was about 8 weeks, as you'd expect. I went to Germany and it was $266. So in all, with as much as I use this lens, it was money well spent, and I wish I had just done that from the beginning and saved the extra month of time and hassle just doing it the right way the first time. I have two other M lenses. One is the 50 Sumalux, which is actually what this overhead shot is being shot with. That one has 6-bit coating, so when I mount that, it just confirms that it's indeed the 50 it's detecting, and I confirm that. But I do have one other M lens, which is the 35 f4, the Telelmar from the Mandler era, which I love, and it's not 6-bit coated, nor do they offer 6-bit coating. So I actually have one of these SL buttons assigned to bring up the M lens profiles, and I narrowed it down. In this list, you can tell it how many lenses you want to choose from. And I just narrowed it down to the 35 Summicron that I had before I sent it off to 6-bit coating, and then of course the 135. So if I'm mounting the 135, I just need to remember to go in and select it. I've gotten a lot better at it, but when I first started using M lenses, I would forget all the time. And so the first month of like using M lenses, my Lightroom catalog's metadata is just like all over the place. I love using an M lens on SLs. I tried so hard to get into rangefinders. I had two M6s, an M10 and M10P, and they were really fun. And I think I'll own one again someday in the future. But right now, because I'm just like a wedding photographer guy, and I have time for like everyday carry slice of life photos, like in my personal life, but that's where like we have a toddler, and having the Q2 and the autofocus is so nice. And so if there is a rare moment where I get to maybe be a little bit more manual with the way I take photos, this is kind of the extent of it. Like I have the SL2Ss that I use for work, but I also can enjoy, the manual focused nature of using an M lens. So I wanted to real quick talk about the silly King of Bokeh title that this lens gets. If you do a quick Google search, a Reddit thread will come up and it will quote the original coiner of the phrase. It was just a reviewer reviewing this lens. He tossed it out there as a one-line thing and didn't think that it would stick like it did. There is no such thing as a King of Bokeh lens. Full stop. No matter the brand, there is just no such thing because bokeh is so subjective. What is the best bokeh? Who knows? I mean, what do you find pleasing? Some people love the bokeh of the Summilux Steel Rim. I didn't really. Some people love the bokeh of the 35 SL. Some people prefer the bokeh of the version 4, and you can see what I mean. There's just no reason to declare one lens over another as like the superior performing lens in the bokeh department. I mean, maybe there's some like more objective overall definition of like good bokeh, but at the end of the day, it has to be subjective because it's your own tastes and preferences. Okay guys, hopefully that was helpful. If you're interested at all in following along and seeing the photos that I make with this lens, I'm over on Instagram at HelloBrandonScott, and I post photos with this lens there all the time, along with a bunch of other Leica gear, because that's all I'm using these days. I would love to see you there and keep the conversation going. So anyways, with that, I hope you have a good one.